After I catered my sister's party, Dad declared, "We voted. Your cooking is a disgrace." My sister smirked. "We'd rather eat trash." I smiled, understood. Now they beg for help. I am 42 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible glue holding my family together. My name is Caroline. I live in a quiet, leafy suburb of Minneapolis with my husband, Benjamin, who is 43, and our 16-year-old son, Lucas. To the outside world, my extended family probably looks like a perfectly normal, happy bunch. We have regular get-togethers, we celebrate holidays, and we share a group chat that pings constantly. But if you look closely, you will see the cracks. Or rather, you will see the massive, gaping holes in how love and respect are distributed in our bloodline. Let me paint a picture for you. My parents, Gordon, who is 70, and Evelyn, who is 68, have a very specific hierarchy when it comes to their children. At the very top sits my older brother, Aaron. He is 45, the firstborn son, the golden boy who can do absolutely no wrong. He has coasted through life on minimal effort, yet my parents act like he hung the moon and the stars. Right beside him, sharing that top pedestal, is my younger sister, Chelsea. She is 35, the baby of the family, and an absolute princess. Chelsea is the kind of woman who treats life like an endless red carpet event where everyone else is just staff. And then, there is me. The middle child. The reliable one. The boring one. Growing up, I quickly realized that the only time I ever got my parents' attention was when I was doing something for them. If I cleaned the whole house, my mother would give me a brief nod. If I cooked dinner so she could rest, my father might pat my shoulder. Over the decades, this evolved into a toxic coping mechanism. I became a chronic people pleaser. I unknowingly used my labor, specifically my cooking and event planning skills, as a currency to buy their love. I became the family's free caterer, the unpaid event planner, the one who remembered everyone's allergies and favorite cake flavors. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet and peaceful. I was standing in my kitchen, sipping a hot cup of coffee. The sun was streaming through the window, hitting the oak cabinets that Benjamin and I had restored ourselves. The kitchen is my sanctuary. It is the one place where I feel completely in control. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, shattering the peace. It was a text message from my mother, Evelyn. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a polite request. It was a royal decree. The message read, "Caroline, Chelsea's 35th birthday is in 3 weeks. We are doing a dinner for 30 people. Your house has the big backyard and the nice patio, so we will do it there. Start planning the menu. She wants something elegant." I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar, heavy sink in my chest. No, good morning. No, are you busy? Just an absolute expectation that I would drop my life, open my home, and empty my wallet for my sister. Benjamin walked into the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower, and saw the look on my face. He didn't even have to read the screen. He just sighed, poured himself a mug of coffee, and leaned against the counter. He knows the drill. He knows I will say yes, because the thought of my mother's disappointed sigh or my father's cold silence terrifies the little girl inside of me who just wants to be loved. The moment I replied okay to my mother, the family group chat turned into an absolute nightmare. It was like I had opened a restaurant where the customers hated the chef, but demanded a Michelin star experience for free. First came my cousin, Hannah. She is 40, deeply invested in whatever wellness trend is popular on the internet that week. She sent a voice note declaring she was strictly gluten-free, dairy-free, and only consuming organic, locally sourced produce. Then came my uncle, a man who has complained at every single meal I have ever cooked. He called me just to say, "Don't make one of those boring vanilla sheet cakes. I want a gourmet chocolate cake, but make it completely sugar-free." I'm watching my waistline. And then, the guest of honor, Chelsea herself. She sent a massive list of demands. She wanted an appetizer station with imported cheeses and cured meats. For the main course, she rejected my idea of a slow-roasted pork shoulder, calling it peasant food. Instead, she insisted on rosemary-infused roasted chicken using only organic, free-range birds, accompanied by premium cuts of steak. 3 days before the party, I drove to 3 different specialty grocery stores. I was pushing a cart with a wobbly wheel through crowded aisles, my anxiety spiking with every item I dropped into the basket. The sheer volume of food required to feed 30 people with high-end tastes is staggering. I had 10 pounds of prime steak, 15 pounds of organic chicken, specialty gluten-free flours, expensive sugar substitutes, imported Italian cheeses, and bags of fresh, organic vegetables. When I finally got to the checkout lane at the 3rd store, my back was aching and I was sweating through my shirt. The cashier started scanning. The numbers on the screen kept climbing. $500, $800, $1,200. By the time she finished, the total was hovering near $2,000. I pulled out my primary credit card and swiped it. The machine beeped aggressively. Declined. Panic seized my throat. The cashier looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. The line of people behind me shifted impatiently. I pulled out my phone and saw a fraud alert text from my bank. They had flagged the unusual spending. I had to frantically reply to the text, wait for the clearance, and use a backup credit card with a higher interest rate just to get out of the store. I hauled bags of groceries into the trunk of my car, my hands shaking. I was paying $2,000 for the privilege of serving people who rarely said thank you. When I got home, Benjamin was waiting in the driveway to help me unload. He took one look at the overflowing trunk and the exhausted look in my eyes. As we carried the heavy bags into the kitchen, he set them down and gently took my hands. "Caroline," he said, his voice thick with concern. "Look at yourself. You are exhausted. You are spending our savings on a party for a sister who didn't even buy you a birthday card last year. You are setting yourself on fire to keep them warm." I looked down at my shoes, blinking back tears. "I know," I whispered. "But if I don't do it, they will say I ruined her milestone birthday. It's just one dinner, Ben. It's a sunk cost. Once this is over, I'll take a break." I was lying to myself, and we both knew it. The 48 hours leading up to the party were a blur of intense, agonizing physical labor. Have you ever tried to prep a gourmet meal for 30 people single-handedly? It is a battle. My kitchen looked like a war zone. I spent 6 straight hours just chopping onions, garlic, and root vegetables. My hands smelled so strongly of sulfur and herbs that no amount of scrubbing could wash it away. My skin was dry, peeling, and covered in tiny microcuts from the chef's knife. At one point, while hurriedly pulling the 3rd test version of the sugar-free chocolate cake out of the oven, my wrist brushed against the scorching hot metal rack. The skin sizzled, and a bright red, blistering burn instantly formed. I didn't even have time to run it under cold water properly. I just smeared some ointment on it, wrapped it in a paper towel, and kept moving. By 5 a.m. on the morning of the party, I was already awake and back in the kitchen. My legs felt like lead. The varicose veins in my calves throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Lucas, my sweet 16-year-old boy, woke up early just to help me. He stumbled into the backyard, yawning, and started stringing up the fairy lights across the patio exactly the way Chelsea had demanded in her mood board pictures. "You look tired, Mom," Lucas said, adjusting a string of warm yellow bulbs. "Are you going to eat something?" I realized I hadn't eaten a solid meal in a day and a half. I was surviving entirely on black espresso and the adrenaline of sheer panic. "I will eat later, honey," I told him, forcing a bright smile. "I just need to get the chicken marinades finished." By noon, the backyard was transformed. It looked like a spread from a high-end lifestyle magazine. There were long tables covered in crisp white linen, elegant sunflower centerpieces that I had arranged myself, and a perfectly curated playlist drifting from the hidden speakers. The food prep was mostly done, but the timing of cooking it all was a delicate, high-wire act. I had alarms set on my phone for every 10 minutes to check the meat, toss the salads, and warm the bread. I stood by the patio door, looking out at the beautiful setting I had created. I felt a fleeting moment of pride. I felt like an executive chef at a prestigious restaurant. But the harsh reality was, a real chef gets a salary, respect from their staff, and appreciation from the diners. I was just the family workhorse. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my apron, and braced myself for the arrival of the critics. The guests started filtering in around 4 in the afternoon. The air in the backyard was thick with the rich, mouth-watering aroma of roasted rosemary chicken and garlic butter steak. Music played softly in the background. It was, objectively, a perfect summer evening. My mother, Evelyn, was the first to walk through the side gate. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She immediately pointed at the driveway and complained, "Caroline, the parking on your street is a nightmare. You should have told your neighbors to move their cars." I swallowed the lump of frustration in my throat and just nodded. Then came Aaron, my older brother, with his wife and their daughter, Daisy. Aaron gave me a quick, distracted pat on the back before heading straight for the cooler of expensive imported beers I had bought. Chelsea arrived 45 minutes late, making a grand entrance. She was wearing a stunning, obviously expensive designer silk dress that caught the late afternoon sun. She didn't even step into the kitchen to check on me. Instead, she floated around the patio, loudly greeting everyone, taking dozens of selfies with the sunflower centerpieces and accepting compliments on the vibe of the party as if she had spent the last 2 days scrubbing floors and burning her arms instead of getting a professional blowout. When it was time to eat, I set up a massive buffet line. I stood behind the tables, serving portions, ensuring Hannah got her specific gluten-free salad and my uncle got the right cut of meat. The sound of silverware scraping against porcelain filled the air. People were eating aggressively, going back for seconds and even thirds. My neighbors, Ian and Bethany, whom I had invited to round out the numbers, came up to me with wide eyes. "Caroline," Ian said, his mouth half full. "This is incredible. Seriously, this steak melts in your mouth." Bethany nodded enthusiastically, squeezing my arm. But from my blood relatives? Not a single word of thanks. Nothing. Just the sound of chewing and loud laughter. For 3 straight hours, I didn't sit down once. I moved constantly, clearing empty plates, refilling wine glasses, wiping up spills. My feet screamed in agony inside my shoes. My lower back felt like it was locked in a vice. But I kept the plastic, accommodating smile plastered on my face, waiting for that one moment of validation from my parents. Waiting for them to say, "Good job, Caroline." The sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Most of the guests were leaning back in their chairs, patting their full stomachs, sipping coffee or wine. I was exhausted, standing near the outdoor bar, stacking a leaning tower of dirty, greasy dessert plates. That was when my father, Gordon, stood up. He picked up a metal spoon and clinked it against his wine glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter. The yard went quiet. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward him. I stopped wiping the counter, a spark of hope fluttering in my exhausted chest. Was this it? Was he going to make a toast to the chef? Was he finally going to acknowledge the $2,000 and the burned skin? Gordon cleared his throat, looking around the tables, making eye contact with everyone except me. Finally, his gaze landed on where I stood by the dirty dishes. His expression wasn't warm. It was stern. Cold. "Listen up, everyone." Gordon's voice boomed across the patio. "We have an announcement to make. Evelyn, the kids, and I had a long talk recently. And we took a family vote." I froze. "A family vote? About what?" He pointed a finger directly at me. "Caroline, we have decided that your cooking is a disgrace. You are far too controlling with these events, constantly making us eat your weird recipes. From now on, you are not allowed to cook for family gatherings anymore. You're done." The words hung in the warm summer air like a toxic gas. A disgrace? Not allowed to cook? I felt the blood drain from my face. My ears started ringing with a high-pitched whine. Before I could even process the shock, Chelsea leaned forward in her chair, swirling her glass of red wine. She looked at me, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on her lips. "Honestly, Caroline," Chelsea said, her voice dripping with venom, loud enough for the entire yard to hear. "We would rather eat literal trash than force down your bland, awful food again. We're sick of pretending to like it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that crushes your lungs. I looked around the yard. 30 people. I looked at Hannah, who had just eaten 2 huge bowls of the salad I made specifically for her. She looked away, pretending to examine her napkin. I looked at my brother, Aaron, the golden boy. I prayed he would stand up, be a man, and defend his sister. Aaron just stared intensely at his shoes, entirely spineless. Benjamin took a step forward, his fists clenched, his face red with sudden, violent anger. He opened his mouth to shout, to tear into my father and sister. But I reached out and grabbed his arm. I squeezed it hard, my nails digging into his skin. I shook my head, silently begging him to stop. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I would not let them turn me into the hysterical, crazy woman they wanted me to be. I gripped the stack of dirty plates so hard I thought the ceramic would shatter in my hands. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then into Chelsea's smirk. I forced the muscles in my face to form a calm, dead, chilling smile. Understood, I said, my voice eerily steady. I turned my back on the silent crowd and walked into the house, carrying the heavy stack of plates. The moment the glass sliding door clicked shut behind me, the facade crumbled. I set the plates on the kitchen island and gripped the edge of the granite counter, gasping for air as if I had been punched in the stomach. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and furious, but I refused to let them fall. I was utterly broken. The humiliation burned through my veins like acid. It wasn't just about the food. It was the realization that my family saw me not as a person, but as an annoying servant they had finally decided to fire. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the stove clock. I stood there in the shadows, trying to steady my breathing. Through the open window above the sink, which looked out toward the side gate of the yard, I heard the crunch of gravel. Someone was walking away from the party to take a phone call. It was Chelsea. I stood completely still, hidden in the dark kitchen, listening. "Yeah, I'm at her house now," Chelsea's voice drifted through the window, low but animated. "It's pathetic. She tried so hard, but I finally shut her down. Mom and Dad backed me up completely." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. Then, she let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "Oh, the crypto accounts are booming," Chelsea bragged. "The new investors just wired the funds. I am telling you, this platform is printing money. Listen, I'm taking over Mom and Dad's 40-year anniversary next month. I am dropping $10,000 on that rooftop penthouse restaurant downtown. I'm going to make it massive. It's going to totally erase Caroline's cheap, boring little dinners out of our family history. She is never going to be the center of attention again." I stopped breathing. The words hit me harder than the public humiliation had. $10,000. A penthouse restaurant. Crypto investors. Suddenly, everything made sickening sense. This wasn't about my cooking being bland. This wasn't about me being controlling. This was a calculated, vicious power play. Chelsea had suddenly come into a lot of money, or at least the illusion of it, and she wanted to flex her new wealth. She wanted to buy the spotlight, and to do that, she needed to completely destroy my role in the family. And my parents, who have always worshipped shiny things and social status, happily played the role of executioners. They threw my 20 years of dedication into the dirt just so they could eat at a $10,000 restaurant on Chelsea's dime. Standing in that dark kitchen, the terrible, aching sadness in my chest evaporated. It was replaced by something else. Something cold. Something sharp. Something made of pure iron. They wanted a family without my cheap dinners? They wanted to eat trash? Fine. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. Mid-roll, before we get to the fallout of this massive betrayal, I want to take a quick second to ask you a favor. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps this video reach more people, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let's see how my family's $10,000 dream turned into an absolute nightmare. The last guest finally drove away just before midnight. The backyard, which only hours ago had been filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, was now dead silent. The fairy lights cast long, twisted shadows over tables littered with half-eaten food and crumpled napkins. I stood on the patio, looking at the mess. In the past, I would have immediately rolled up my sleeves, hauled out the heavy trash bags, and scrubbed the grill until my knuckles bled. But not tonight. Benjamin walked out through the sliding glass door. He didn't say a word. He just picked up a stack of plates and started walking toward the kitchen. Lucas followed right behind him, grabbing the empty wine bottles. "Leave it," I said. My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. It was entirely flat. Benjamin stopped and looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Leave the mess outside for tonight," I told him, stepping into the kitchen. "I am only doing the dishes inside." I stood at the sink for 2 hours, running the sponge under scalding hot water. The repetitive motion of scrubbing the ceramic plates was the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't cry. The tears had completely dried up, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. When the final plate was placed in the drying rack, I dried my hands, walked into the living room, and picked up my phone. It was time to build a wall. An iron wall. I opened my contacts. I scrolled down to my brother Aaron's name. The brother who had stared at his shoes while our parents verbally crucified me. I tapped the screen and selected block caller. Then I went to Chelsea's name. The sister who wanted to erase me with her crypto money. Blocked. I opened the family group chat, the endless stream of demands and complaints that had dictated my life for 2 decades. I didn't leave the group because I knew that would trigger a wave of drama. Instead, I simply muted all notifications and archived the conversation. It vanished from my screen. Finally, I looked at the contacts for my mother, Evelyn, and my father, Gordon. A part of me wanted to block them too. But they were in their late 60s and early 70s. If there was a genuine medical emergency, a heart attack or a car accident, I needed to know. So, I compromised. I set their ringtone to completely silent and turned off their message notifications. They could reach my phone, but they could no longer demand my immediate attention. The next morning was a Sunday. Usually, a Sunday morning after a family party involved me waking up at 6 a.m., cleaning the rest of the house, and answering a barrage of texts from my mother critiquing whatever she thought went wrong. I woke up at 9 a.m. The house was utterly quiet. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted into the bedroom. Benjamin had made breakfast. I picked up my phone. There was a text message from Gordon. I opened it, my heart rate spiking briefly, expecting an apology or perhaps a continuation of his cruel speech. The text read, "Looks like it might rain this afternoon. Make sure you cover the patio furniture." I stared at the words. I read them 3 times. He was acting like nothing had happened. He had publicly humiliated me, declared my cooking a disgrace, and allowed his youngest daughter to say she would rather eat trash. And his follow-up the next day was a passive-aggressive instruction about patio furniture. It was the ultimate form of gaslighting. He wanted me to just swallow the abuse and get back to work. I locked my phone, tossed it onto the nightstand, and walked out of the bedroom to join my husband and son for breakfast. I didn't reply. And for the first time in my 42 years of life, I did not care if it rained on the patio furniture. The first 2 weeks of my withdrawal from the family felt like recovering from a severe addiction. My brain was so hardwired to anticipate their needs that I found myself randomly panicking on a Tuesday afternoon, thinking I had forgotten to buy Hannah's expensive gluten-free flour before remembering I didn't have to anymore. Without the crushing weight of their demands, I suddenly had dozens of free hours every week. I didn't have to spend my Thursday evenings driving across town to drop off meals for Aaron. I didn't have to spend my Saturdays researching complex recipes to impress Gordon. I started reclaiming my life. Benjamin and I began taking long hiking trips at a local state park on Sunday mornings. We would walk for miles under the canopy of pine trees, just breathing in the crisp air. I started attending every single one of Lucas's soccer practices, sitting in the bleachers with a thermos of tea, just cheering for my boy. Physically, the changes were undeniable. The chronic ache in my lower back, a souvenir from years of leaning over hot stoves for 12 hours a day, began to fade. The stress-induced migraines that used to blind me at least twice a month completely disappeared. I was sleeping through the night. But the most significant change was social. A few weeks after the disastrous birthday party, our neighbors, Ian and Bethany, knocked on our door. They had brought over a couple of pizzas from a local shop and a cheap bottle of wine. "We just wanted to check on you," Bethany said, stepping into the living room. "You have been so quiet lately." We sat around our small kitchen table, eating out of cardboard boxes. There were no imported cheeses. There were no organic rosemary chickens. There was just greasy pepperoni, cheap wine, and genuine laughter. Ian told a terrible joke that made Lucas snort his soda out of his nose. Bethany asked me about my work and actually listened to my answer without interrupting to talk about herself. I looked at them across the table, a profound realization hitting me. This was what a meal was supposed to be. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a test to earn love. It was just human connection. Ian and Bethany didn't care if the pizza crust was perfectly baked. They just wanted my company. I had spent 2 decades desperately trying to buy a seat at my own family's table, only to realize I could just build a new table with people who actually valued me. My phone remained silent. Neither Gordon nor Evelyn tried to call. They didn't come to my house to demand an explanation for my sudden disappearance. They were too busy basking in the glow of Chelsea's sudden, mysterious wealth. They assumed I would eventually come crawling back, begging to serve them again. They fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I was no longer the desperate middle child. I was a woman who had finally realized her own worth. Even though I had blocked Chelsea and Aaron and muted my parents, I was not entirely disconnected from the family drama. Lucas, being a 16-year-old with a smartphone, still had them on his social media feeds. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Lucas paused the television and turned his phone toward me. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Aunt Chelsea is acting crazy." I looked at the glowing screen. It was Chelsea's Instagram page. She had transformed her profile from a moderately annoying diary of her weekend brunches into a loud, obnoxious showcase of extreme wealth. There were videos of her popping champagne in what looked like a VIP club. There were photos of her leaning against a brand-new, leased Porsche. She was constantly using hashtags about being a crypto millionaire, a self-made boss, and a wealth builder. But it wasn't the cars or the champagne that made my stomach knot. Lucas swiped to the next photo. It was a picture of my parents, Gordon and Evelyn, sitting at a glossy mahogany conference table. Chelsea was standing behind them, a wide, predatory smile on her face. Gordon had a pen in his hand, hovering over a thick stack of legal documents. The caption read, "Helping my amazing parents secure their retirement with our exclusive investment fund. Making big money moves." I took the phone from Lucas, zooming in on the image. A cold chill crept up my spine. I am not a financial advisor, but I have enough common sense to recognize a glaring red flag when I see one. Chelsea was a 35-year-old woman who, just 6 months ago, had to borrow money from Aaron to fix her transmission. Now she was suddenly running an exclusive investment fund? She was displaying every classic symptom of someone caught up in a Ponzi scheme or a fraudulent crypto pump-and-dump operation. The leased cars, the flashy clubs, the aggressive recruitment of family members, it was a textbook financial trap. Are Grandma and Grandpa really giving her their retirement money? Lucas asked, sounding worried. I stared at the proud, greedy smiles on my parents' faces in the photo. My first instinct, the old Caroline instinct, screamed at me to pick up the phone. I wanted to call Gordon, tell him to put the pen down, warn him that he was about to lose everything. I wanted to protect them. But then, the memory hit me like a physical blow. I remembered the clinking of the spoon against the glass. I remembered my father standing in my backyard, surrounded by the food I had bled to prepare, announcing to 30 people that I was a disgrace. I remembered Chelsea's cruel smirk as she said, "We would rather eat literal trash." I had tried to warn them before about smaller things, and they had always treated me like an idiot. They wanted Chelsea's fake glamour. They wanted the $10,000 penthouse dinner she had promised them. If I called to warn them now, they would just accuse me of being jealous of Chelsea's success. They would say I was being controlling again. I handed the phone back to Lucas and took a deep breath. "Yes, Lucas." I think they are giving her their money, I said quietly. But it is not our problem. Put the phone away. Let's finish our movie. I chose to stay silent. I chose to let them walk willingly into the fire. Exactly 1 month after the birthday party incident, the illusion finally began to shatter. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was standing in the living room, peacefully folding a basket of warm laundry while Benjamin was outside mowing the lawn. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. The screen lit up, showing a call from Evelyn. Normally, I would let it ring silently. But something in my gut told me to answer it. The timing was too specific. It was just 1 week before my parents' highly anticipated 40th wedding anniversary. The event Chelsea had loudly bragged about taking over. The event that was supposed to erase me from family history. I pressed accept and put the phone on speaker, continuing to fold a towel. "Hello," I said, my voice completely neutral. "Caroline." "Oh, sweetheart, it is so good to hear your voice," Evelyn practically sang into the receiver. Her tone was sickly sweet, dripping with a fake warmth I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked, not stopping my folding. There was a slight hesitation on the line. She clearly wasn't expecting me to be so blunt. "Well, honey, your father and I were just talking about how much we miss your lovely dinners. Your anniversary is coming up next weekend, and we realized that nobody brings the family together quite like you do." I stopped folding. I gripped the edge of the laundry basket. "What happened to the $10,000 penthouse restaurant Chelsea was booking?" I asked, cutting straight through her nonsense. A heavy, awkward silence filled the line. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice had lost its sugary coating and cracked with panic. Chelsea is very busy right now. She has some issues with her accounts. The funds are locked up temporarily. The restaurant required a massive deposit she couldn't make. So we thought a nice, cozy backyard barbecue at your house would be much more meaningful." I almost laughed out loud. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Chelsea's fraudulent money had obviously dried up, the scam was collapsing, and now they expected the family servant to step in at the last minute to save them from social embarrassment. "No," I said firmly. "Caroline, please," Evelyn pleaded. "We have 50 people expecting a party. We can't cancel. You have to do this for us." I leaned down so my mouth was closer to the phone. "You took a vote, Mother. My cooking is a disgrace. You're sick of my bland food. Chelsea said you would rather eat literal trash. So, I suggest you grab some garbage bags and start serving. Do not call me again to fix your mistakes." I ended the call before she could scream. I didn't feel guilty. I felt incredibly powerful. The next weekend, the anniversary party happened. I know exactly how it went down because Daisy, Aaron's 20-year-old daughter, had been secretly texting me updates from the front lines. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking iced tea, reading her messages. "It's a complete disaster, Aunt Caroline," Daisy texted. "Grandma tried to order cheap catering at the last minute, but it never arrived. There are 40 people standing in Grandma's small living room. It's hot. There is no food except a few bags of chips. Chelsea is locked in the bathroom crying because her phone won't stop ringing with angry investors looking for their money. Grandpa is screaming at Aaron to go buy pizzas. People are already making excuses and leaving. It's humiliating." I read the text to Benjamin. He just shook his head, took a sip of his beer, and looked out at our perfectly peaceful, quiet backyard. When narcissistic people face public humiliation, they never blame themselves. They desperately seek a scapegoat to deflect the shame. For my family, that scapegoat had always been me. 2 days after the disastrous anniversary party, my phone started buzzing with notifications from distant relatives and family friends. Evelyn had taken to Facebook to execute a smear campaign. I opened the app and found myself tagged in a massive, dramatic post. My mother had written a 5-paragraph essay detailing how heartbroken she was. She claimed that on their most important milestone anniversary, her middle daughter, Caroline, had cruelly and selfishly abandoned them. She spun a wild narrative, claiming I had promised to host the event and backed out at the last minute out of pure spite, leaving 2 elderly people to fend for themselves in front of 50 guests. Some people, Evelyn wrote at the end of the post, "Forget the sacrifices their parents made for them. It is a tragedy when a child becomes so cold and ungrateful. Family should always come first, no matter what." I sat on my couch, my hands shaking with raw anger as I read the comments rolling in. Distant aunts and uncles, people I hadn't seen in a decade, were commenting things like, "Shame on her," and sending prayers, "Evelyn, you don't deserve this." My vision blurred. The injustice of it all felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. I had spent thousands of dollars, burned my own skin, and exhausted my body for these people for 20 years. And 1 month of saying no turned me into the villain of the family. I tapped the comment box. My thumbs flew across the keyboard, drafting a furious, fact-filled response. I was going to expose the vote. I was going to expose Chelsea's Ponzi scheme. Before I could hit send, my screen refreshed. A new comment had just been posted. It was from Daisy. My quiet, 20-year-old niece, who usually sat in the corner reading a book during family gatherings, had just dropped a nuclear bomb on her grandmother's post. Daisy wrote, "This is an absolute lie, Grandma. Aunt Caroline didn't abandon you. You and Grandpa publicly humiliated her at Aunt Chelsea's party. You stood in front of 30 people and told her cooking was a disgrace and fired her from the family. Chelsea said she would rather eat trash than Aunt Caroline's food. Aunt Caroline was your unpaid servant for 2 decades, and you never appreciated her once. You only wanted her back last weekend because Chelsea's fake crypto scam blew up and she couldn't afford the fancy restaurant she promised you. Look in the mirror before you call anyone selfish. Aunt Caroline deserves better." I stared at the screen, my mouth slightly open. In less than 3 minutes, Daisy's comment had 50 likes. 2 cousins replied in shock, asking if that was true. Evelyn did not reply. She could not delete the comment fast enough without looking guilty, and the damage was already done. The truth was out there. A single tear slipped down my cheek, followed by another, until I was openly weeping. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. After 42 years of feeling invisible and misunderstood, someone in my own bloodline had stood up and fiercely defended me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't controlling. I was a victim who had finally escaped, and someone saw the truth. The fallout from Daisy's public execution of my parents' lie was swift and severe. Aaron, completely terrified of conflict, forced Daisy to delete the comment an hour later, but the screenshots had already circulated through the extended family network. The fake image my parents had spent years cultivating was shattered. People knew Chelsea was a fraud, and they knew Gordon and Evelyn were ungrateful bullies. A week later, I received an email. The sender was Chelsea. I hadn't heard from her directly since the day she smirked at me from her lawn chair. I opened my laptop at the kitchen island, poured myself a cup of tea, and clicked on the message. It was a sprawling, chaotic block of text, devoid of any real paragraph breaks. "Caroline," the email began. "I know things have been tense, but I am writing to apologize. I was just jealous of you. Everyone always praised your dinners and your thoughtfulness. I just wanted to be the one taking care of Mom and Dad for once, and I let my ego get the better of me. I made a bad investment, and now a lot of people are very angry with me. My friends have abandoned me. I am so stressed I can barely sleep. We are sisters. We need to stick together in tough times. Please call me so we can fix this." I sat back on my stool and analyzed the words on the screen. A year ago, an email like this would have sent me rushing to her apartment with a casserole and an open checkbook. I would have felt validated by her admission of jealousy. But the therapy of distance had sharpened my vision. I could now read between the lines with absolute clarity. This was a textbook narcissist apology. Note what is missing: she never actually apologized for the specific cruel thing she said. She didn't apologize for humiliating me. She justified her behavior by calling it jealousy to stroke my ego, hoping it would soften me up. But the most telling part was the middle. "I made a bad investment. My friends have abandoned me." That was the real motive. Chelsea wasn't reaching out because she suddenly realized the value of our sisterhood. She was reaching out because the music had stopped in her little Ponzi scheme. Her fake friends, the ones drinking her bought champagne, had vanished the moment the money ran out. She was drowning, isolated, and terrified. She needed a life raft. And historically, Caroline the people-pleaser had always been the most reliable life raft in the family. She wanted me to fix her mess, comfort her, and probably give her money. I looked at the cursor blinking at the end of her email. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no obligation. She had chosen her path when she decided my pain was an acceptable price for her ego. I didn't type a single word in response. I moved the cursor to the top of the screen, clicked the trash can icon, and deleted the email. Then I permanently emptied the trash folder. She was out of my life, and she was going to have to face the consequences of her actions entirely on her own. Thanksgiving arrived crisp and cold in Minnesota. In any other year, I would have spent the entire month of November in a state of high anxiety, managing a sprawling spreadsheet of dietary restrictions, ordering massive turkeys, and preparing my house for an invasion of 20 ungrateful relatives. This year, my oven was on, but the energy in my kitchen was entirely different. I had volunteered to coordinate the Thanksgiving feast for the local community center, specifically targeting underprivileged families and children in our district. I wasn't doing it alone. My chosen family was right there with me. Benjamin was standing at the industrial sink in the community kitchen, whistling while scrubbing massive roasting pans. Lucas was organizing a chaotic line of giggling kids who were waiting to decorate sugar cookies. Ian and Bethany, our wonderful neighbors, were setting up the buffet tables with bright orange tablecloths. And right beside me, mashing a 50-pound pot of potatoes, was my niece, Daisy. Since the Facebook incident, Aaron had tried to forbid her from speaking to me, but Daisy was an adult who made her own choices. She had driven over early that morning just to help. "You know, Aunt Caroline," Daisy said, wiping a smudge of flour off her forehead. "This is the least stressed I have ever seen you on a holiday. You actually look like you're having fun." I smiled, handing her a stick of butter. "That is because I am, Daisy. When you cook for people who actually want to be fed, instead of people who just want to be served, it changes everything." The doors opened at noon, and the hall filled with people. There were single mothers, elderly couples, and kids whose eyes went wide at the sight of the food. I stood behind the serving line, handing out plates piled high with roasted turkey, stuffing, and hot gravy. Every single person who took a plate looked me in the eye. They smiled. They said, "Thank you, ma'am," and "God bless you." A little boy, maybe 6 years old, came back to my station, pulled on my apron string, and told me the macaroni and cheese was the best thing he had ever eaten. I felt a lump form in my throat, but it was a lump of pure joy. My cooking was not a disgrace. My labor was not worthless. I had a gift for bringing comfort to people through food. The problem was never the meals I prepared. The problem had always been the toxic, broken people I was trying to feed. Serving these grateful strangers healed a wound inside me that I didn't even know was bleeding. I looked across the bustling hall, watching Benjamin laugh with a group of teenagers, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The euphoria of the community center dinner carried me through the evening. By 8 p.m., Benjamin, Lucas, Daisy, and I were back at our house, sitting around the living room in our sweatpants, eating leftover pie and watching a football game. My phone, sitting on the end table, began to vibrate. I glanced at the screen. It was Gordon. He had called twice earlier in the day, but I had ignored it. Now he was calling for the third time. The persistence told me it wasn't just a holiday greeting. I picked up the phone and stepped into the quiet hallway, closing the living room door behind me. I pressed accept. "Hello," I said. "Caroline." Gordon's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the booming, authoritative voice that had condemned me in the backyard. It was a weak, trembling, pathetic sound. He was actively weeping. "Caroline, please don't hang up," he choked out. "We are in so much trouble. We need you." I leaned against the wall, my expression hardening. "What kind of trouble?" "It's Chelsea's investment," Gordon cried. "It was all a scam, Caroline. The platform vanished. The men she was working with took the money and disappeared. She has nothing. The people she recruited are threatening to sue her. I am aware it was a scam, Dad, I said coldly. Anyone with a brain could see that. So she is broke. Why are you crying? Gordon let out a ragged sob. Because we gave her our money, Caroline. She convinced us it was a guaranteed return. She said we would double our retirement. We took out a second mortgage on the house. We gave her the cash. We owe the bank $20,000 immediately, or they are going to start the foreclosure process. We have nothing left. We are drowning. $20,000. My elderly parents had literally bet their home on the golden child's delusions of grandeur, and they had lost everything. We need your help, Caroline, Gordon begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. You and Benjamin have savings. You are the responsible one. We need the money to cover the bank demand, and we need you to help us organize our finances. You have to save this family. Please. I stood in the hallway, looking at the grain of the wood floor. He wasn't apologizing for the past. He was just desperately trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship, and he expected me to be the human sacrifice to stop the water. Dad, I said, my voice steady, carrying no anger, only absolute finality. Do you remember the summer? Do you remember standing in my yard, eating the food I paid for, and telling 30 people that I was a disgrace? Do you remember letting Chelsea tell me my efforts were literal trash? Caroline, please, we didn't mean it. It was a mistake. No, I interrupted him, my voice slicing through his panic like a knife. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose her. You chose the illusion of her $10,000 dinners over my reality. You voted me out of the family, Gordon. So here is my answer. Go ask the people who voted that day. Ask Chelsea for the money. Ask Aaron to fix your finances. I am not your ATM. I am not your servant. And I am no longer your punching bag. Do not ever call me for money again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the red button, and ended the call. I walked back into the living room. Benjamin looked up from the television, searching my face. I gave him a small, genuine smile and sat back down on the couch, pulling a blanket over my legs. I didn't tell him about the $20,000 right then. I didn't want Gordon and Evelyn's misery to poison the peace of our evening. The next morning, I received a text from Aaron. It was long and pathetic. He apologized for not standing up for me at the party. He admitted that Gordon and Evelyn were trying to force him to take out a personal loan to cover their $20,000 debt, and his wife had threatened to divorce him if he gave them a single penny. He was terrified. He wanted me to intervene. I read the message, felt a brief flash of pity for the weak man he was, and left him on read. That was the last time I heard from them. Through the grapevine, mostly via Daisy, I learned the bitter end of their story. The bank didn't foreclose immediately, but Gordon and Evelyn were forced to sell their cars and take on part-time retail jobs in their 70s just to make the massive monthly payments. Their social circle, the one they cared so much about, completely abandoned them after the embarrassing anniversary party and the exposure of Chelsea's fraud. Chelsea herself had to move back into their cramped spare bedroom, miserable and broke. The three of them were trapped in a miserable house, drowning in debt, blaming each other every single day. They had built a house of cards based on ego, favoritism, and cruelty. When the wind blew, it collapsed exactly as it was meant to. I, on the other hand, am thriving. My marriage is stronger than ever. Lucas is doing beautifully in school. Daisy has practically become a second child to us, frequently coming over for quiet, stress-free dinners. I still cook, but only for people who look me in the eye and say thank you. I cut the toxic rot out of my life, and the wound finally healed. Blood makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and gratitude are what make you a family. Looking back at the empty chairs my parents and siblings used to fill, I feel nothing but peace. But some of my distant relatives are calling me cold-blooded for leaving my elderly parents with a $20,000 debt caused by my sister. So, tell me, am I the villain for walking away and refusing to save them from their own toxic choices? Should I have forgiven them when they hit rock bottom? Thank you so much for watching my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world to me.